I sat at my cherry wood desk in our home office, staring at the bank statement in disbelief. The Wexler Family Trust, established for our twins Emma and Ethan, showed a balance of just $842.16. 6 months ago, it had contained over $380,000. My hands trembled as I clicked through the transaction history, revealing a systematic drainage through wire transfers to an account I didn't recognize. All authorized by one person, my husband, Michael. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The bitter taste of betrayal filled my mouth as I leaned back. In my chair, my gaze drifting to the framed family photo on my desk. Michael with his arm around me, our 12-year-old twins beaming in front. The perfect family portrait. Such a convincing illusion. I reached for my phone and opened the tracking app I'd installed 3 weeks ago. Not out of jealousy, but from growing suspicion as Michael's late nights at Wexler Enterprises became more frequent. The little blue dot showed him exactly where. He claimed to be at the Grand Hotel downtown. The same hotel where Wexler Enterprises was hosting their leadership retreat this weekend. What Michael didn't know was that I'd already spoken with his brother James this morning, who mentioned in passing that the retreat had been postponed until next month. Another lie in a growing collection. I took a screenshot of the bank statement, then methodically began documenting everything: transaction dates, amounts, account numbers. I wasn't going to confront Michael in a tearful rage. That wasn't my style. As Chief Financial Officer at Meridian Healthcare for the past decade, I'd learned that financial mysteries always left a paper trail. And I was very, very good at following money. I first met Michael Wexler 15 years ago at a charity fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. He was charming, ambitious, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. As the heir to Wexler Enterprises, a regional chain of high-end furniture stores his grandfather had founded, Michael had grown up with wealth and privilege. I, on the other hand, had worked for everything I had, putting myself through business, school, climbing the corporate ladder at Meridian Healthcare from financial analyst to CFO. "You're not like the other women here," he'd said, approaching me with 2 champagne flutes. "You actually look bored by all this money." I'd smiled, taking the offered glass. "I'm more impressed by how people earn it than how they spend it." He'd laughed, genuinely delighted. "Rebecca Mitchell, you're going to be trouble." And for a while, we were perfect together. We married within a year, and I continued my career while Michael took over as CEO of Wexler Enterprises from his aging father. When the twins arrived, we agreed I would take 6 months off before returning to work. Michael had seemed supportive, proud even of my ambition and success. The first cracks appeared around year 7. Small things at first. Michael questioning my late meetings, making snide comments about my male colleagues, suggesting that perhaps it was time I focused more on family than finances. I dismissed these as temporary insecurities, never imagining they were early warning signs of something more sinister. Now, staring at the decimated trust fund, money that had come from my family, from my grandmother's estate specifically designated for the twins' education, I realized how blind I'd been. I closed my laptop and poured myself a glass of the Cabernet I kept in my office. My mind wasn't racing. It was calculating. As I sipped the wine, I began mentally cataloging our assets, ownership structures, and vulnerabilities. Michael had always been careless with details, preferring the showmanship of business to the substance. He signed documents without reading them, delegated financial matters to others, and had once laughingly admitted he couldn't remember the login credentials to half his accounts. His carelessness. My opportunity. I opened my secure cloud drive and began creating a new folder labeled Contingency Planning. The twins were staying with my sister Jennifer this weekend, a convenient coincidence that would give me uninterrupted time to develop my strategy. First, I needed to understand exactly what I was facing. I texted my longtime friend Olivia, who served as legal counsel at Meridian. "Free for coffee tomorrow? Need your eyes on something important. Discretion necessary." Her response was immediate. 10 a.m., Bluebird Cafe, corner table. "Everything okay?" I replied with a simple, "We'll explain tomorrow. Thank you." Next, I logged into our investment accounts, taking screenshots of current balances and recent activity. I did the same with our joint checking, savings, and credit card accounts. Michael had always insisted we maintain joint finances. "We're a team, Becca." But I had quietly maintained my own separate accounts as well, funded by my personal bonuses and an inheritance from my father. I checked our property records next. Our family home in Oakwood Hills was in both our names, but I had been the one to contribute the entire down payment from my savings before we married. Michael had insisted on adding his name to the deed, claiming his father would be insulted if the Wexler heir lived in a house he didn't own. I'd agreed without argument, seeing no reason to create tension over something so trivial. How naive I'd been. As I continued my digital reconnaissance, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Meetings running late. Networking dinner tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." I took a screenshot of this message as well, adding it to my growing collection of evidence, then replied, "No problem. The twins are at Jennifer's until Sunday. Have a productive evening." I didn't add, "Love you." A small omission that gave me more satisfaction than it should have. The following morning, I dressed with particular care, a charcoal gray suit that projected authority, subtle makeup, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. I wasn't dressing for coffee with Olivia. I was armoring myself for what was to come. Bluebird Cafe was busy but not crowded, the Saturday morning rush having tapered off. Olivia was already at a corner table, 2 steaming mugs in front of her. At 45, she was a few years older than me, with quick eyes that missed nothing and a reputation as one of the sharpest legal minds in the healthcare industry. More importantly, she was the only person I trusted completely. "You look like you're heading to battle, not brunch," she observed, as I slid into the seat across from her. Maybe I am. I pulled out my tablet and opened the folder containing the trust fund statements. Michael has been draining the twins' education trust, almost $380,000 gone in 6 months. Olivia's expression remained neutral, but her eyes hardened. "Show me everything." For the next hour, I laid out what I knew. The vanishing trust fund, Michael's increasingly secretive behavior, his unexplained absences, and the lies about his whereabouts. "Have you confronted him?" Olivia asked when I finished. "No, and I'm not going to, not yet." I leaned forward. "I want to understand what I'm dealing with first, and I need to protect what's left." Olivia nodded slowly. "Smart. Confrontation without preparation only gives him time to cover his tracks." She took a thoughtful sip of her coffee. "We need a team. Someone to trace those wire transfers, someone to look into Wexler Enterprises financials, and someone who specializes in high-asset divorces." Divorce? I hadn't spoken the word aloud yet, though it had been forming in my mind. "Rebecca." Olivia's voice was gentle but firm. "He stole from your children. What else do you need to know?" She was right, of course. Whatever explanation Michael might offer, whatever excuses he might make, the fundamental breach of trust couldn't be repaired. He had taken money specifically designated for our children's future and directed it elsewhere. There was no coming back from that. "I can recommend people," Olivia continued. "Discreet professionals who won't set off any alarms. But first..." She pulled out a legal pad and pen. "Let's make sure we understand your current position. What's in your name only? What's joint? And what might be vulnerable if Michael realizes you're on to him?" We spent another hour cataloging my financial position. My separate accounts contained approximately $850,000. my inheritance, bonuses, and careful investments over the years. The house had about $2 million in equity, half of which would theoretically be mine. Our joint investment portfolio was worth roughly $2 million. Then there was Wexler Enterprises. Though Michael was CEO, ownership of the company was complex. His father, Harold, still owned 40%. Michael owned 30%. His brother James owned 15%, and the remaining 15% was divided among various family members. None of the shares were in my name. The business will be the complicated part, Olivia mused. Colorado is an equitable distribution state, so you're entitled to a fair portion of marital assets. But business valuations can get messy, especially with family companies. I sat back considering this. What if I don't want a portion? What if I want control? Olivia raised an eyebrow. Control of Wexler Enterprises? That would be challenging. The family would fight you tooth and nail. Not necessarily all of them, I said, thinking of my father-in-law Harold, who had always respected my business acumen, and James, who had grown increasingly frustrated with Michael's management style. And they might not have a choice if Michael has put the company at risk. What are you thinking? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm thinking those wire transfers went somewhere, I said. And I'm thinking Michael isn't smart enough to cover his tracks properly. Olivia smiled slowly. Now we're talking strategy. Let me make some calls. By Monday morning, our team was assembled. Olivia would coordinate the legal strategy. Marco Vega, a forensic accountant she'd worked with on corporate fraud cases, would trace the money. And Diane Powell, a family law attorney specializing in high-asset divorces, would prepare for the eventual separation. I returned to work at Meridian Healthcare, maintaining absolute normalcy. Michael had come home late Sunday, smelling of expensive scotch and wearing the slightly smug expression I'd come to recognize as his post-conquest face. He'd kissed my cheek, asked about the twins, and headed upstairs to shower before I could engage in any meaningful conversation. Fine by me. Every day he remained ignorant of my investigation was another day for us to build our case. Marco's first report came Wednesday evening. The wire transfers from the trust fund had gone to a holding company called Summit Acquisitions LLC. This entity, created just 7 months ago, had a single member, Michael. From there, the money had moved to another LLC called Cedar Heights Development, which had purchased a luxury condominium in downtown River Point, the adjacent city to ours, about 30 minutes away. Property records show Cedar Heights Development as the owner, Marco explained during our secure conference call. But the utilities are registered to a Veronica Palmer. The name meant nothing to me, but a quick social media search during the call revealed a 28-year-old brunette who listed her occupation as executive assistant at Wexler Enterprises. Her Instagram showed a woman with expensive taste, designer clothes, exotic vacations, and most recently, photos of a stunning penthouse view that matched the description of the Cedar Heights property. He bought his girlfriend a condo with our children's education money, I said, my voice completely flat. The betrayal was so absolute, so cliché, that it almost seemed beneath my dignity to be emotional about it. There's more, Marco continued. I've been reviewing Wexler Enterprises financial statements for the past 2 years. There are significant discrepancies between reported inventory values and actual purchasing records. Someone's been cooking the books, making the company look more profitable than it is. Michael, I said with certainty. As CEO, he was responsible for presenting quarterly results to the board, which consisted of his father, brother, and 2 family friends who knew nothing about business. Only Harold would have the experience to spot creative accounting, and at 78, he had been increasingly hands-off, trusting his son to continue his legacy. Most likely, Marco agreed, and there's evidence of corporate funds being diverted to personal expenses as well. Substantial amounts. Now we were getting somewhere. Can you document everything? Create an airtight case? Already on it. Give me another week to compile everything properly. I thanked him and ended the call, then sat in my home office thinking. Michael hadn't just betrayed me personally. He was potentially driving his family's company, his father's life's work, into the ground through mismanagement and fraud. Harold Wexler had always been kind to me, treating me more like a daughter than an in-law. He was old school, believing in quality, integrity, and building something that would last generations. How would it destroy him to learn what his son was doing? Unless he didn't have to learn the full extent of it, not if someone stepped in first. I picked up my phone and made a call I'd been considering for days. James? It's Rebecca. I need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet me tomorrow? Somewhere private. James Wexler had always been the more serious brother, less charismatic than Michael, but more thoughtful. He had served as COO of Wexler Enterprises for years, handling operations while Michael managed the public-facing aspects of the business. There had always been tension between them, with James resenting Michael's promotion to CEO, despite James having more experience and a better understanding of the business. We met at a quiet restaurant outside the city, where no one would recognize us. I laid out what I had discovered, not about the trust fund, not yet, but about the financial irregularities at Wexler Enterprises. I suspected something wasn't right, James said, his face grim. Inventory numbers haven't matched what I'm seeing in the warehouses, and some of our suppliers have mentioned payment delays, despite our reports showing strong cash positions. It's worse than that, I said, showing him some of Marco's preliminary findings. If these patterns continue, the company could face serious trouble within a year. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so similar to his brother's that it momentarily threw me. Dad would be devastated. This company is his legacy. Which is why we need to address it before it's too late, I said carefully. Before anyone else discovers these discrepancies. He looked at me sharply. What are you suggesting? A restructuring, one that removes Michael from financial control while keeping the situation contained, for Harold's sake. Michael would never agree to step down voluntarily, and Dad still believes the sun rises and sets on his firstborn. He might agree if the alternative was worse, I said. And as for Harold, what if the restructuring was presented as a modernization plan, something that recognizes Michael's visionary leadership while transferring operational and financial control to more detail-oriented parties? Like me, James said, a slow smile spreading across his face. And you? I nodded. I've been managing finances for a healthcare system with 10 times the revenue of Wexler Enterprises for years. I could step in as CFO, clean up the books, implement proper controls, and no one outside the family would ever need to know there was a problem. Why would you do this? James asked. Why not just confront Michael or go to Dad directly? I hesitated, then decided James deserved some measure of the truth. Because your family has been my family for 15 years. Because I respect what your father built. And because I believe in saving something worth saving, rather than watching it burn. What I didn't say, because Michael stole from our children, because he betrayed everything we built together. Because I'm going to take from him what he values most, his position, his power, his family's respect. James considered me for a long moment. You'd need board approval for such a restructuring. Dad controls 40%, Michael 30%. Even with my 15%, we'd need at least some of the minority shareholders. Leave that to me, I said. Just tell me, are you in? He extended his hand across the table. I'm in. Over the next 2 weeks, I laid the groundwork carefully. Marco compiled a comprehensive report documenting the financial irregularities at Wexler Enterprises, creating two versions, a complete one detailing Michael's malfeasance and a sanitized, one that identified the problems without directly implicating him. Diane prepared divorce papers but kept them on hold. We agreed that the corporate restructuring needed to happen first, before Michael had any inkling that I was planning to leave him. I arranged a lunch with Harold Wexler, something I did every few months. At 78, he remained sharp, though his energy wasn't what it once was. We met at his club, where he proudly introduced me to his friends as my brilliant daughter-in-law who manages millions for Meridian Healthcare. Over his favorite roast beef sandwich, I carefully steered the conversation toward Wexler Enterprises. "I've been thinking," I said casually, "with all the changes in retail these days, has the company considered restructuring its management approach? Many family businesses are adopting more specialized leadership models." Harold looked interested. "What sort of models?" "Well, instead of a traditional CEO handling everything, you might have a president focused on vision and strategy, a COO handling operations, and a CFO managing financial health and growth. It creates better checks and balances while allowing each leader to focus on their strengths." "Interesting idea," Harold said, "though Michael seems to handle everything just fine." "He does," I agreed. "But imagine how much more he could accomplish focusing purely on what he does best: building relationships, being the face of the company, developing the brand. Meanwhile, James could concentrate on operations, which has always been his strength, and a dedicated financial officer could implement modern systems to maximize profitability." Harold considered this, taking a thoughtful bite of his sandwich. "Who did you have in mind for this financial role? Someone from outside?" I smiled. "Actually, I've been considering a change. 15 years at Meridian has been wonderful, but I've always felt connected to Wexler Enterprises. It's family, after all." Harold's eyes lit up. "You'd leave Meridian to work for us? Rebecca, that would be a coup. Your financial expertise within the family? Michael would be thrilled." I doubted that very much, but I nodded. "It would have. To make sense for everyone, of course. The board would need to approve such a restructuring." "The board is family," Harold said dismissively. "If I support it, and you say James is on board, Michael respects your financial acumen. I'm sure he'd see the benefits." "Perhaps we could discuss it at the next board meeting," I suggested. "I could prepare a presentation on modern governance structures for family enterprises." "Wonderful idea," Harold agreed enthusiastically. "I'll make sure it's on the agenda." Phase 1, complete. Harold was receptive to the restructuring concept and excited about my potential involvement. Now I needed to ensure we had the votes before Michael realized what was happening. The remaining 15% of shares were divided among 5 minor relatives, cousins and an aunt who had been given small stakes when the company was founded. None took an active role in the business, but all received healthy dividends. I arranged individual meetings with each, presenting myself as Michael's concerned wife worried about the company's future. "We've noticed some concerning trends in the financial reports," I told each of them. "Nothing catastrophic yet, but indicators that we might face challenges if we don't modernize our approach. Michael, James, and Harold are considering a management restructuring to address these issues before they impact your dividends." The mention of dividends got their immediate attention. None of these relatives knew much about business, but all understood the concept of receiving less money. By the end of the week, I had verbal commitments from shareholders representing 10% of the company, more than enough to secure a majority when combined with Harold's 40% and James's 15%. 1 week before the scheduled board meeting, I received Marco's final report. The situation at Wexler Enterprises was worse than initially thought. Michael had been systematically misreporting financial results for at least 3 years, inflating profits by shifting inventory values and recording sales that hadn't actually occurred. He had also diverted over $1 million from the company to various personal expenses, including the condominium for Veronica Palmer. More disturbingly, he had recently taken out a substantial loan against his Wexler Enterprises shares, using the money to invest in a speculative real estate development in River Point. Based on the documents Marco had uncovered, this development was being managed by Veronica's brother, who had no previous experience in real estate. He's not just having an affair, Marco concluded. He's planning an exit. These actions suggest he's extracting as much value as possible from both your personal assets and the company before making a clean break. The final piece clicked into place. Michael wasn't just betraying me. He was betraying his entire family, setting himself up for a new life with his younger girlfriend, funded by money stolen from our children and his family's company. The day before the board meeting, I finalized my presentation on modern governance structures for family enterprises. That evening, I prepared a special dinner at home, Michael's favorite, beef Wellington with roasted potatoes and asparagus. I opened an expensive bottle of Cabernet and set the dining room table with our best china. "What's the occasion?" Michael asked when he came home, looking slightly uncomfortable. He'd been increasingly distant, often returning late and sleeping in the guest room under the pretense of not wanting to disturb me. "No occasion," I said, smiling warmly. "Just felt like doing something nice. The twins are at soccer practice. Until 8. I thought we could have some time together." Throughout dinner, I kept the conversation light, asking about work and responding with interest to his vague answers. I didn't mention the board meeting scheduled for tomorrow, though. I knew it was on his calendar. I didn't mention Veronica Palmer or the condominium in River Point. I didn't mention the decimated trust fund or the fraudulent financial reports. Instead, I was the perfect, supportive wife, the role I had played for 15 years while building my own career, raising our children, and maintaining our home. Michael relaxed visibly, perhaps believing that I remained oblivious, that his secrets were still safe. "This was nice," he said as we finished dessert. "I'm sorry I've been so busy. Lately, the business." "I understand," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "Family businesses come with unique pressures. You carry the weight of your father's legacy." He looked momentarily taken aback, perhaps surprised by my insight, then nodded. "Exactly. Dad doesn't understand how much the market has changed. The pressure to maintain the same profit margins in today's retail environment must be enormous," I agreed sympathetically. "Perhaps it's time to consider new approaches, more modern structures." He looked at me curiously. "What do you mean?" I shrugged casually. "Just something I've observed in other family enterprises. Sometimes distributing leadership responsibilities can actually strengthen the company. But listen to me, talking business at dinner." I smiled and stood to clear the plates. "I'm sure you know what's best for Wexler Enterprises." Michael went to bed early, claiming fatigue. I stayed up late in my home office, reviewing my presentation one final time and confirming arrangements with James, who would second all my motions at the board meeting. Tomorrow, Michael Wexler would discover exactly what happened when you betrayed the wrong woman, one who had spent years watching, learning, and preparing for an opportunity he had handed her through his own greed and carelessness. And unlike Michael, I didn't make careless mistakes. I woke before dawn on the day of the board meeting, my mind clear and focused. In the adjacent guest room, Michael still slept soundly, unaware that by sunset, his position at Wexler Enterprises would be fundamentally changed. I dressed with precision, choosing a navy blue suit that conveyed authority without intimidation, pearl earrings that had been a gift from Harold on my 10th wedding anniversary, and subtle makeup that emphasized my eyes but maintained a professional appearance. In the kitchen, I prepared coffee and reviewed my presentation notes one final time. The full board meeting would begin at 10 a.m. at Wexler Enterprises headquarters, But James and I had arranged to meet Harold privately at 9 a.m. to walk through our proposed changes. This preliminary meeting was crucial. With Harold's unqualified support, the restructuring would be presented as a united family decision rather than a coup. Michael came downstairs at 7:30, looking slightly harried as he poured coffee into his travel mug. "Big day," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Quarterly numbers review." "The board meeting," I nodded, keeping my tone casual. "I remember. Good luck with the presentation." He glanced at me, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "You're dressed formally today." "Meeting with potential investors for the new cancer wing?" I lied smoothly. "The Wilson Foundation is considering a substantial donation." His tension visibly eased. "Right. Well, have a good day." He leaned in for a perfunctory kiss, which I accepted with a practiced smile. "You too, darling. I hope the board is pleased with your results." As soon as Michael's car disappeared down our tree-lined street, I gathered my materials and headed out. Not to Meridian Healthcare, but to Wexler Enterprises headquarters, where Harold would be waiting. I had already arranged a week's vacation from Meridian, my first in 3 years, citing family matters that required my attention. My assistant had been instructed to forward only genuine emergencies. Harold was already in his private office. When I arrived, James sitting across from him. Both men rose as I entered. "Rebecca!" Harold embraced me warmly. At 78, he remained tall and distinguished, with a full head of silver hair and the same confident bearing that Michael had inherited. "James tells me you have quite the presentation prepared." "I do," I confirmed, setting my portfolio on the conference table. "But first, I wanted to discuss some sensitive matters with both of you privately." Harold's expression grew serious as he gestured for us to sit. "Is everything all right? You seem different today." I met his gaze directly. "Harold, what I'm about to share will be difficult to hear, but I believe you deserve the truth, delivered with respect and care, rather than discovering it through other channels." Over the next 30 minutes, I presented a carefully edited version of Marco's findings, highlighting the financial irregularities at Wexler Enterprises, the misreported inventory, and the concerning cash flow patterns. I did not mention the trust fund, Veronica Palmer, or the condominium. Those were personal betrayals, not relevant to the business discussion. I also framed the issues as potential mismanagement rather than deliberate fraud, allowing Harold to preserve some dignity regarding his son's actions. "These discrepancies suggest a lack of proper oversight and controls," I explained, showing him the sanitized version of Marco's report. "Without immediate intervention, the company could face serious cash flow problems within 8 to 12 months. Harold's face had gradually paled as I walked him through the documentation. "Are you certain about these figures?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Unfortunately, yes," James confirmed. "I've reviewed everything independently. Rebecca's assessment is accurate." Harold sat back, looking suddenly older than his years. I've always trusted Michael with the financial side. He seemed to have a natural talent for it, always talking about growth and opportunities. He shook his head slowly. "I should have looked more closely." "You trusted your son," I said gently. "That's not a failing, Harold." "What do you propose?" he asked after a moment of heavy silence. I opened my presentation folder and laid out the restructuring plan. Michael would remain president, focusing on client relationships and brand development, areas where his charisma was an asset. James would be promoted to Chief Operating Officer with expanded authority, and I would step in as Chief Financial Officer, bringing my expertise from Meridian Healthcare to implement proper financial controls and restore accurate reporting. This approach accomplishes several objectives, I explained. It leverages each person's strengths, creates appropriate checks and balances, and addresses the current issues without public scandal or embarrassment for the company or the family. Harold studied the organizational chart I'd prepared. Michael won't like this. He's accustomed to having final say on all decisions. The alternative would be worse, James pointed out. If these financial irregularities continue and become public, the reputational damage could be irreparable. Harold nodded slowly. And you're willing to leave Meridian to help save our company? He asked me. Wexler Enterprises is family, I said simply. I would never stand by and watch it falter if I could help. What I didn't say, I would never allow Michael to destroy his father's legacy through his selfishness and greed. I would never let him walk away from the wreckage with millions while leaving his family to clean up his mess. And I would never, ever forgive him for stealing from our children. Very well, Harold said finally. I support this restructuring plan. Let's present it to the full board. The main boardroom at Wexler Enterprises occupied the entire top floor of their headquarters, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. The space had been designed to impress, with a massive mahogany table, leather chairs, and the company's first furniture piece, a hand-carved writing desk crafted by Harold's father, displayed prominently in a glass case. By 9:50 a.m., the board members had assembled. Harold, Michael, James, Harold's longtime friend and attorney Richard Grantham, and his golf partner William Peterson, who had provided some of the initial capital for the company's expansion decades ago. The 5 minor shareholders had sent their proxy votes, as they rarely attended meetings in person. Michael did a poor job of masking his surprise when I walked in with Harold and James. Rebecca, what are you doing here? I invited her, Harold said calmly. We have some important business matters to discuss today that will benefit from Rebecca's financial expertise. Michael's face tightened momentarily before he forced a smile. Of course. Always happy to have your input, honey. I took a seat beside Harold, directly across from Michael, and arranged my materials neatly before me. As CEO, Michael would normally call the meeting to order and lead the proceedings, but today, Harold exercised his authority as chairman. Before we begin the regular quarterly review, Harold announced, I'd like to propose a special agenda item, a governance restructuring for Wexler Enterprises. He nodded to me. Rebecca has prepared a presentation on modern management structures for family businesses, which I believe merits our serious consideration. Michael's expression darkened. Restructuring? This is the first I'm hearing of this. Which is why we're discussing it now, as a board, Harold replied evenly. Rebecca, please proceed. For the next 20 minutes, I delivered my presentation with the same confident precision I'd used in countless Meridian Healthcare board meetings. I outlined the challenges facing retail furniture businesses in the current market, the increasing complexity of financial management, and the benefits of specialized leadership roles. I presented case studies of successful family businesses that had adopted similar models, emphasizing improved profitability and sustainability. In conclusion, I finished, I propose that Wexler Enterprises adopt a 3-tiered executive structure. A president focused on client relationships and brand development, a chief operating officer managing supply chain and store operations, and a chief financial officer overseeing financial health and compliance. This structure would position the company for continued success while honoring its family heritage. Richard Grantham, who had been taking notes throughout my presentation, looked impressed. Sound reasoning. And who would fill these roles? Harold answered before Michael could speak. Michael would continue as president, focusing on what he does best, being the face of our company. James would be promoted to chief operating officer with expanded authority over operations. And Rebecca has graciously offered to join Wexler Enterprises as chief financial officer, bringing her considerable expertise from Meridian Healthcare. The shock on Michael's face was quickly replaced by thinly veiled anger. This is absurd. I'm the CEO. We don't need this. Corporate restructuring nonsense. Actually, James interjected calmly, our current financial situation suggests otherwise. He distributed copies of the sanitized report, highlighting the cash flow issues and inventory discrepancies without directly attributing them to Michael's mismanagement. As the board members reviewed the documents, Michael's face flushed. These figures are taken out of context. We've been investing in expansion opportunities, which temporarily impacts our cash position. What expansion opportunities? Harold asked quietly. The board has not approved any significant new investments this fiscal year. Michael faltered, realizing his mistake too late. I was exploring options, preliminary research. William Peterson, who had founded 3 successful businesses before retiring, looked up from the report with a frown. These inventory discrepancies are concerning, as are these cash withdrawals labeled as strategic consulting. Who is Pinnacle Advisors, and why have they received over $400,000 in the past year? I knew exactly who Pinnacle Advisors was, a shell company Michael had created to funnel money to himself. But I remained silent, allowing Michael to dig his own grave. A specialized retail consultant, Michael improvised, helping us with market positioning. Strange, James remarked. As COO, I've never met with any representatives from Pinnacle, despite being responsible for implementing all operational changes. The room grew tense as the implications settled over the board. Richard Grantham, who had known Michael since childhood, looked particularly troubled. I think Rebecca's restructuring proposal merits serious consideration, he said. Finally, it provides a framework for addressing these irregularities while maintaining continuity for the company. I agree, William added. No offense, Michael, but these financials raise significant questions about current management practices. Michael's face had gone from flushed to pale. He turned to his father, expecting his usual unconditional support. Dad, you can't seriously be considering this. I've led the company to record profits for the past 3 years. Have you? Harold asked softly, sliding Marco's report across the table. Because these actual figures tell a different story. I believe it's time for additional oversight. Michael glanced at the report, then at me, his expression shifting as understanding dawned. You did this, he said, his voice low. You went behind my back. I met his gaze calmly. I presented factual information to the board for consideration, as any responsible financial professional would do when identifying concerning patterns. Harold called for a vote on the restructuring proposal. As I had meticulously arranged, the outcome was predetermined. Harold's 40%, James's 15%, and the proxy votes representing 10% easily carried the motion, officially establishing the new management structure effective immediately. Michael retained his 30% ownership and his new role as president, but his unilateral authority over financial decisions was gone. This is a mistake, Michael said tightly as Harold adjourned the meeting. You don't understand what you're doing. On the contrary, I replied quietly, I understand exactly what I'm doing. As the board members filed out, offering congratulations on my new position, Michael remained seated, staring at me with barely contained fury. When we were finally alone, he dropped all pretense. What the hell do you think you're playing at? He demanded. Undermining me in front of my own board? I presented a solution to real problems, I replied calmly. Problems you created through mismanagement and deception. You had no right to interfere in my company. Our company now, I corrected him. And I had every right to protect Harold's legacy from your greed. Just as I had every right to investigate where the money from our children's trust fund disappeared to. His face went completely still. What are you talking about? The Wexler Family Trust, Emma and Ethan's education fund, $380,000, gone in 6 months. Transferred to Summit Acquisitions LLC, which then purchased a luxury condominium in River Point for your executive assistant, Veronica Palmer. I maintained perfect composure as I laid out his betrayal in clinical detail. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't trace every dollar? Michael's expression shifted from shock to calculation. It was a temporary reallocation. I was planning to restore those funds with interest once certain investments matured. Like the speculative real estate development managed by Veronica's inexperienced brother? The one you funded by borrowing against your Wexler shares? I shook my head. You're not nearly as clever as you think you are, Michael. Every transaction leaves a trail. Every lie creates a vulnerability. You taught me that, unknowingly, throughout our marriage. He stared at me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. What do you want? Money? Is that it? I can replace the trust fund. You will replace it, I agreed. That's non-negotiable, but it's far too late for that to be sufficient. Then what? You want to punish me? Take control of the company? Is that your endgame? I gathered my materials and stood. My endgame, as you put it, is simple. Accountability. You betrayed our children. You betrayed your father and the company he built. Now you will face the consequences of those choices, not through public scandal or criminal charges, but through the quiet, systematic dismantling of everything you took for granted. You can't do this, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I already have, I replied. As of today, I control the financial operations of Wexler Enterprises. I have full visibility into every transaction, every account, every decision with financial implications. I will know immediately if you attempt to divert additional funds or manipulate reports. And if I refuse to accept this restructuring, then Richard Grantham will receive the unredacted version of Marco's report, detailing exactly how you defrauded the company. As a former prosecutor and current board member, he would be legally obligated to report such findings to the appropriate authorities. I paused, letting the implications sink in. I wonder how many luxury condominiums you could purchase from a prison cell. Michael's face contorted with anger, but beneath the rage, I could see the first glimmers of fear. Good. He should be afraid. He had grossly underestimated me, assuming that the supportive, accommodating wife who had stood beside him for 15 years would simply accept his betrayal and deception. Why are you doing this? He asked finally. If you know about Veronica, about the money, why not just file for divorce? Take your settlement and move on? Because this isn't just about me, or even about our marriage, I explained. It's about Emma and Ethan, whose future you gambled with. It's about Harold, whose life's work you were willing to destroy for your own benefit. Some betrayals go beyond the personal, Michael. They require a more comprehensive response. I walked to the door, then turned back. I'll be moving into my new office today. As CFO, I'll need access to all financial records and accounts immediately. Oh, and I've scheduled a meeting with the company's banking partners for tomorrow morning to implement new authorization protocols for all transactions. You'll be expected to attend, of course, in your new role as president. The look of impotent fury on his face as I left the boardroom provided a small measure of satisfaction, but it was only the beginning. Phase 2 of my plan was now complete. I had secured my position at Wexler Enterprises and effectively neutralized Michael's ability to continue his financial malfeasance. Now it was time for Phase 3, systematically uncovering and reversing his damage while preparing for the inevitable personal confrontation. I spent the remainder of that first day establishing my authority as CFO. I met with the accounting team, requesting comprehensive reports on all accounts and ongoing financial obligations. I reviewed the banking relationships and signatory permissions. I examined the company's debt structure and cash position. With each conversation, each document reviewed, the extent of Michael's mismanagement became clearer, and the challenge of rectifying it more daunting. By 6 o'clock, when most employees had departed, I received a text from Olivia. How did it go? I replied simply, Phase 2 complete, proceeding to Phase 3. Her response made me smile. Remind me never to cross you. I worked until nearly 9, organizing my findings and preparing for the banking meeting the following day. When I finally arrived home, the house was dark. Michael's car wasn't in the driveway, which didn't surprise me. He was undoubtedly seeking comfort from Veronica, perhaps planning a counter-strategy, or simply drowning his humiliation in expensive scotch. The twins were staying with my sister for the week, an arrangement I had made in anticipation of this transitional period. I had told them their father and I were working through some grown-up problems and that we all needed a little space. Emma, perceptive as always, had given me a searching look before asking, "Is Dad in trouble?" I had hugged her tightly and promised that we would talk more when they returned. 12 was old enough to understand some hard truths, if presented carefully. I poured myself a glass of wine and took it to my home office, where I opened my secure folder and updated my notes. The day had unfolded largely as planned, but Michael's reaction suggested he might not accept his diminished role without a fight. I needed to prepare for potential complications. My phone rang, James calling to check in. "Dad's pretty shaken," he reported. "He's been going through old financial reports trying to identify when things started going wrong." "How are you supporting him?" I asked. Harold's well-being remained a priority in my strategy. Despite my determination to hold Michael accountable, I had no desire to see his father suffer unnecessarily. I took him to dinner, let him talk through his feelings. He's disappointed in Michael, but also blaming himself for not providing more oversight. James sighed. "He asked a lot of questions about you, how long you've known about the problems, why you decided to step in." "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you discovered financial irregularities recently and brought them to my attention out of concern for the family and the business. That you offered your expertise because you care about the company's legacy." He paused. "I didn't mention anything about the trust fund or Veronica. Those felt like private matters." "Thank you," I said, genuinely appreciative. "Harold deserves to retain some illusions about his son. The business issues are enough for him to process right now." "Any sign of Michael?" "No. I assume he's with Veronica, planning his next move." "Do you think he'll fight the restructuring?" I considered this carefully. "He'll try something. His ego won't allow him to accept the situation as it stands. But his options are limited. We control the board votes, and exposing the full extent of his financial misdeeds would hurt him more than anyone else." After ending the call with James, I reviewed my calendar for the coming days. Tomorrow's banking meeting was crucial. I needed to establish new financial controls that would prevent Michael from accessing company funds without proper authorization. Beyond that, I had scheduled meetings with the company's auditors, key suppliers, and the management team from each furniture showroom. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Veronica Palmer. We need to talk. Alone." Interesting. I hadn't anticipated direct contact from Michael's mistress, but it presented an opportunity to gather information about his current state of mind and potential plans. "Regarding?" I responded simply. "Michael, the company, my arrangements, things you should know. Either a trap or an offer of alliance, potentially valuable either way. Tomorrow, noon, Café Laurent." I selected a public location where we wouldn't be recognized, far from both Wexler Enterprises and Meridian Healthcare. "I'll be there," came the reply. I added the meeting to my calendar, then prepared for bed, setting my alarm for 5 a.m. Tomorrow would be challenging, and I needed to be at my sharpest. Michael didn't return home that night, which suited me perfectly. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, no longer burdened by uncertainty or suspicion. The path forward was clear. Now, continue implementing my strategy, adapt to any resistance, and systematically reclaim everything Michael had put at risk. I arrived at Wexler Enterprises headquarters by 7 a.m. the next morning, wanting time to prepare for the 9 a.m. banking meeting. The building was largely empty, allowing me to work undisturbed in my new office, a generous corner space with views of the city and the river beyond. The decor was masculine and traditional, reflecting the company's heritage, but I had already ordered subtle changes to make the space my own. At 8:30, James stopped by to coordinate our approach for the banking meeting. "Michael just arrived," he reported, "wearing yesterday's suit, looking like he hasn't slept. Dad's trying to talk to him privately before the bankers get here." "Good," I nodded. "Harold should maintain his role as the family patriarch. It will keep Michael somewhat in check during the meeting." The banking representatives arrived precisely at 9 a.m. 3 men in conservative suits from First National, Wexler Enterprises' primary financial institution for over 40 years. Harold made the introductions, explaining the company's new management structure as a modernization initiative to position the company for future growth. If the bankers found the sudden restructuring unusual, they didn't show it. I presented the new financial controls we wish to implement: dual authorization requirements for all transactions over $10,000, daily transaction reports sent directly to my office, and updated signatory permissions that removed Michael's unilateral authority while adding mine and James's. I framed these changes as industry best practices rather than corrective measures, maintaining the fiction that this was a planned evolution rather than crisis management. Michael sat silently through most of the meeting, his jaw tight, responding curtly when directly addressed. Only when I outlined the new authorization protocols did he finally object. "These restrictions will hamper our ability to move quickly on opportunities," he argued. "As president, I need flexibility to make decisions without bureaucratic delays." "Any legitimate business opportunity can accommodate proper financial controls," I countered smoothly. "And as you've often said, Michael, our family business thrives on collaboration and consensus." Harold nodded in agreement. "Rebecca's right. These changes align with my original vision for the company: careful stewardship and financial responsibility." The lead banker, sensing the undercurrent of tension, diplomatically suggested a compromise: expedited review processes for time-sensitive opportunities while maintaining the dual authorization requirement. I accepted this adjustment, knowing it would make no practical difference to the outcome. Michael would not be able to divert company funds without scrutiny. By the end of the meeting, all the new controls were approved and scheduled for immediate implementation. The bankers left with assurances of the company's continued stability under its enhanced leadership structure, and Harold departed for a previously scheduled doctor's appointment, leaving Michael, James, and me alone in the conference room. "Satisfied?" Michael asked bitterly once the door closed. "You've effectively handcuffed me in my own company." "We've implemented standard financial controls," I corrected him. "The kind that should have been in place all along. The kind that might have prevented $1 million from being diverted to your personal expenses over the past 3 years. His eyes widened slightly. He hadn't realized I knew the exact amount. "Those were legitimate business expenses." "Were they? Like the $380,000 from our children's trust fund that purchased a luxury condominium for your girlfriend? Was that a legitimate business expense too?" James looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with the personal nature of the confrontation. "I should let you two discuss this privately." "No need," I said, gathering my materials. "Michael and I will have plenty of time to address personal matters separately. This was about business." I turned to Michael. "I have a lunch meeting, but I'll be back this afternoon to continue reviewing the accounts. The forensic accountant has identified several transactions requiring immediate attention." "What forensic accountant?" Michael demanded. "You've brought in outside consultants without authorization." "As CFO, I don't require authorization to engage financial specialists," I reminded him. "And given the state of the books, expert assistance is necessary. Don't worry. Their findings will be shared with the board at the appropriate time. I left him seething in the conference room, his carefully constructed world continuing to unravel around him. Phase 3 was proceeding exactly as planned. Financial controls established, outside experts documenting the extent of his misdeeds, and Michael himself gradually realizing the comprehensive nature of my response to his betrayal. Now it was time to meet Veronica Palmer and discover what Michael's mistress thought she could offer in this high-stakes game of consequences and accountability. Café Laurent occupied a quiet corner in the arts district, far from the financial center where both Wexler Enterprises and Meridian Healthcare were located. With its eclectic decor, diverse clientele, and discreet seating arrangements, it provided the perfect neutral territory for my meeting with Veronica Palmer. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered privacy while maintaining a clear view of the entrance. I ordered a sparkling water and reviewed my notes from the morning's banking meeting, appearing entirely absorbed in my work. In reality, I was mentally preparing for multiple scenarios. Veronica could be seeking an alliance, planning to record our conversation for Michael's benefit, or simply fishing for information about my intentions. At precisely noon, she entered the cafe. In person, Veronica Palmer looked younger than her 28 years, petite, with glossy brown hair and the polished appearance of someone who invested considerable time and resources in their image. Designer handbag, tasteful jewelry, immaculate manicure. She scanned the room briefly before spotting me, then approached with practiced confidence. "Rebecca?" She extended her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I gestured to the seat across from me. "You said there were things I should know. I'm listening." She ordered a green tea before continuing, her posture carefully poised. "First, I want to clarify something. My relationship with Michael isn't what you probably think." "You mean you're not sleeping with my husband while living in a condominium purchased with money stolen from my children's education fund?" I raised an eyebrow. "Please, enlighten me." A flash of discomfort crossed her face, quickly controlled. "The situation is more complicated than that." "It usually is," I agreed mildly, though the financial transactions themselves are remarkably straightforward. $380,000 from the Wexler Family Trust to Summit Acquisitions to Cedar Heights Development to the luxury condominium where you currently reside. Those are facts, not interpretations. Veronica's composure faltered momentarily. She hadn't expected me to have traced the money so thoroughly. "I didn't know where the money came from," she said after a pause. "Michael told me it was his personal investment account." "And you believed that?" She met my gaze directly. "I believed what I needed to believe, just like you did for 15 years of marriage." The comment was designed to provoke an emotional response, but I merely sipped my water. "You didn't request this meeting to discuss my marriage. What is it you think I should know?" Veronica glanced around the cafe before leaning forward slightly. "Michael is planning to empty the company accounts and disappear. Tonight." I maintained a neutral expression, though this information, if true, represented a significant escalation. "Continue." "He has access to offshore accounts you don't know about. After yesterday's board meeting, he called me in a rage, saying everything was falling apart and it was time for the contingency plan. He's been transferring smaller amounts for months, but now he's planning to take everything he can access and leave the country." "Why are you telling me this?" Her carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. "Because he's planning to leave me behind. When I confronted him about it last night, he said I was a liability he couldn't afford now. That once he was established somewhere new, he'd send for me." She gave a bitter laugh. "I'm many things, Rebecca, but I'm not stupid enough to believe that." "So this is revenge," I observed. "He betrayed you, so you're betraying him." I prefer to think of it as self-preservation, Veronica replied. Michael isn't the man either of us thought he was. I considered her carefully. While Veronica's information aligned with my analysis of Michael's character, I couldn't simply accept her claims without verification. Do you have any proof of these offshore accounts? Transaction records, account numbers? She reached into her designer handbag and withdrew a USB drive. Everything I could find on his laptop. Password information, transfer records, correspondence with banks in the Cayman Islands and Liechtenstein. He doesn't know I made copies. I didn't reach for the drive immediately. What do you want in exchange for this information? Protection, she said simply. When everything collapses around Michael, and it will with or without my help, I don't want to be collateral damage. I didn't know he was stealing from your children or the company. I want that on record officially. And unofficially? Veronica hesitated, then said, the condo. I know where the money came from now, and I won't contest if you reclaim it. But I need somewhere to live until I can relocate and start over. 6 months, maximum. I considered her offer. The information she provided could be invaluable in preventing Michael from doing further damage, but I had no intention of allowing her to continue benefiting from funds stolen from my children. 3 months, I countered. You can remain in the condo for 90 days while you make new arrangements. During that time, you will provide any additional information about Michael's activities that might be relevant to recovering misappropriated funds. After 90 days, the property reverts to me entirely, and you vacate without issue. These terms will be documented in a formal agreement prepared by my attorney. Veronica didn't hesitate. Agreed. One more condition, I added. You will not contact Michael to warn him that you've spoken with me. If he reaches out to you, you will immediately inform me of the nature of the communication. Of course, she nodded quickly. I have no loyalty to Michael anymore. I finally took the USB drive, slipping it into my pocket. I'll need your signature on the agreement today. My attorney will prepare it immediately. How soon can you stop him? Veronica asked, a hint of genuine concern in her voice. He seemed desperate last night, unpredictable. Immediately, I assured her. The banking changes we implemented this morning already restrict his access to company funds, but these offshore accounts require additional measures. I texted Olivia under the table. Need emergency injunction. Michael planning to empty accounts and flee. Evidence secured. How quickly? Her response came moments later. Judge Crawford on call today. Can have paperwork ready in 2 hours with proper documentation. I stood, signaling the end of our meeting. My attorney will contact you shortly with the agreement regarding the condominium. Sign it, return it, and maintain complete silence about our conversation. If Michael contacts you, respond normally, but inform me immediately. Veronica nodded, looking somewhat relieved. I understand. As I left Café Laurent, I was already dialing Marco. I need you to verify offshore account information immediately, I said when he answered. Sending you data now, priority 1. On it, he confirmed. What am I looking for specifically? Account numbers, transaction history, current balances. Need confirmation within the hour to support emergency injunction. You got it. We'll call as soon as I have verification. My next call was to James. Where are you right now? At the office. Just finished reviewing inventory records with the warehouse manager. The discrepancies are worse than we thought. Is Michael there? No, James replied. He left about 20 minutes ago. Said he had a lunch meeting with Peterson Furniture Group about a potential acquisition. This was concerning. William Peterson would certainly have mentioned any legitimate acquisition discussions during yesterday's board meeting. That's not true. Peterson isn't meeting with him. I need you to check Michael's office immediately. Look for any indications of what he's planning. What's going on? James asked, his voice tense. I have credible information that Michael is planning to empty company accounts and disappear, possibly leave the country. I'm working on legal measures to prevent this, but I need you to be... My eyes at the office. I'll check right now and call you back. While driving back to Wexler Enterprises, I made one final call, to Harold. Much as I wanted to shield him from further distress regarding his son, his cooperation was essential now. "Rebecca, how did the banking meeting go?" He answered warmly. "The changes are implemented," I confirmed. "But Harold, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Can you meet me at the office in 30 minutes? "Of course," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Is it serious?" "Yes," I said simply. "And it requires both discretion and decisive action." "I'll be there." By the time I reached Wexler Enterprises, Marco had verified the offshore accounts. Michael had indeed established banking relationships in multiple countries using Shell, companies similar to those he'd created for the condominium purchase. Current balances totaled approximately $3, $4 million, presumably the $2. $1 million diverted from company funds plus the majority of our children's trust fund money. James met me in the lobby, his expression grim. "Michael's office is cleared. Out, personal items gone, computer wiped. He's not coming back. Did you check the safe in the executive conference room?" James looked startled. "No, I didn't think..." "The bearer bonds," I explained, already moving toward the elevator. "Harold keeps bearer bonds in that safe as emergency reserves. Half. $1 million, easily transportable, difficult to trace." We rushed to the executive floor, finding Harold already waiting outside the conference room, looking confused and concerned. "Rebecca, James, what's happening? Why did you ask me about the safe?" "We need to check if the bearer bonds are still there," I explained, keeping my tone professional despite the urgency. "There's evidence that Michael may be attempting to misappropriate company assets." Harold's face paled, but he moved to the painting that concealed the wall safe and entered the combination. The safe swung open to reveal nothing. The bearer bonds were gone. "They were here yesterday morning," Harold said quietly. "I checked them before the board meeting." I exchanged glances with James. He must have taken them after the meeting, once he realized his authority was being restricted. "I don't understand," Harold said, looking suddenly older and more fragile. "Why would Michael do this?" "Because he's been systematically defrauding the company for years," I said gently. "The restructuring threatened his ability to continue doing so, and now he's attempting to take what he can before disappearing." Harold sank into a chair, his shoulders slumped. "My son, stealing from his own family's company?" "I'm sorry, Harold," I said, meaning it sincerely. Despite everything Michael had done, I took no pleasure in Harold's pain. "But we need to act quickly to prevent further losses." James put a supportive hand on his father's shoulder while I called Olivia. "The bearer bonds are gone. $500,000. Need to add this to the injunction and alert authorities." "Papers are with Judge Crawford now," Olivia confirmed, adding the new information. "She's expediting due to flight risk. Should have signed orders within the hour." "We need to freeze all accounts immediately," I told Harold. "Not just the, company accounts. Michael's personal accounts, credit cards, everything." Harold nodded, his initial shock giving way to resolve. "Do whatever is necessary, Rebecca. I trust your judgment completely." Over the next 2 hours, we implemented a comprehensive financial lockdown. With Harold's authority as chairman and majority shareholder, we contacted all banking partners to freeze Michael's access to company funds. Olivia secured the emergency injunction from Judge Crawford, freezing Michael's personal accounts and prohibiting him from leaving the country. We filed a police report regarding the missing bearer bonds, providing documentation of their value and removal from the company safe. By late afternoon, we received confirmation that the measures were in place. If Michael attempted to access any known accounts or cross any border using his passport, he would be detained. The offshore accounts were more complicated. U.S. courts had limited jurisdiction over foreign banks, but alerts had been placed with international financial authorities regarding potential money laundering. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, I maintained my outward composure, directing actions with the same efficiency I brought to my role at Meridian Healthcare. Inside, however, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication that my assessment of Michael's character had proven accurate, determination to recover the stolen funds, and a deep, simmering anger that he would steal from our children and then attempt to abandon them completely. At 5:30 p.m., as we were finalizing the day's emergency measures, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Mrs. Wexler?" An official voice inquired. "This is Agent Carmichael with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. We have Michael Wexler in custody at Denver International Airport. He was attempting to board a flight to Zurich with false identification and substantial cash. We understand you've filed reports regarding missing funds?" "Yes," I confirmed, signaling to Harold and James that something significant was happening. "Wexler Enterprises has reported missing bearer bonds valued at $500,000, and I've personally reported funds missing from my children's trust account. We'll need formal statements from all relevant parties," Agent Carmichael explained. "Mr. Wexler is currently being processed on charges related to the false identification and currency declaration violations, but additional charges may apply based on your reports." "We'll cooperate fully," I assured him. "Should we come to your offices now?" "Tomorrow morning would be sufficient," he replied. "We'll hold Mr. Wexler overnight regardless. 9 a.m. at our downtown office?" "We'll be there," I confirmed, ending the call and turning to Harold and James. "That was the FBI. They've arrested Michael at the airport. He was trying to leave the country with false identification and cash, presumably the bearer bonds converted to currency." Harold closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this latest blow. When he opened them, his expression had hardened with resolve. "So it's true. All of it." "I'm afraid so," I said gently. "What happens now?" James asked. "We meet with the FBI tomorrow morning to give formal statements. Michael will likely face federal charges for the false identification and currency violations at minimum. The trust fund and bearer bond theft will add additional charges." I paused, considering Harold's emotional state. "This will become public. Harold, there's no way to keep it quiet once federal charges are filed." The older man nodded slowly. "I understand. The company's reputation will suffer." "Not necessarily," I countered. "We've already implemented the restructuring. We can position this as the reason we made those changes. The board discovered irregularities, took immediate action to address them, and is cooperating fully with authorities. It's a story of responsible governance, not corporate scandal." Harold managed a weak smile. "Always thinking 3 steps ahead, aren't you, Rebecca?" "It served me well," I acknowledged. "And it will serve Wexler Enterprises well now." Later that evening, as I sat in my home office preparing notes for the FBI meeting, I received a text from Olivia. "Heard about the arrest. Impressive work. Need anything before tomorrow's meeting?" I considered this. Full documentation of trust fund transfers. Original statements showing balances before depletion. Clear timeline of discovery and actions taken. "Already compiled," she responded. "We'll meet you at FBI office at 8:30 to review strategy." I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, feeling the accumulated tension of the day in my shoulders and neck. Michael was in custody. The immediate financial bleeding had been stopped. Tomorrow would bring a new phase of this ordeal. Formal statements, potential charges, inevitably public exposure of Michael's crimes. I hadn't planned for him to be arrested quite so quickly, though I had anticipated he might attempt to flee once his authority at the company was restricted. In truth, his arrest simplified certain aspects of my strategy. No need to worry about him attempting to access additional funds or creating further complications. But it accelerated the timeline for addressing the personal aspects of his betrayal, particularly how to explain the situation to Emma and Ethan. My phone rang again, my sister Jennifer calling about the twins. "Hey Becca, the kids are asking when they can come home." Emma's getting particularly anxious about missing her science project deadline. "I know," I sighed. "Things have developed faster than expected. Can you bring them home tomorrow afternoon? I should be finished with an important meeting by noon." "Of course," Jennifer agreed. "Is everything okay? You sound exhausted." I hesitated, not ready to share the full situation even with my sister. "It's been a challenging couple of days. I'll explain everything when you bring the kids home." After ending the call, I went to check on the twins' rooms, making sure everything was in order for their return. Emma's science project materials were neatly arranged on her desk, exactly as she'd left them. Ethan's basketball uniform was clean and folded on his bed, ready for Thursday's game. These ordinary details of my children's lives stood in stark contrast to the extraordinary circumstances unfolding around them. Their father arrested for financial crimes, their trust fund depleted, their family on the verge of permanent rupture. How would I explain this to them? What words could possibly make sense of their father's betrayal without destroying their sense of security and trust? They were old enough to understand the concept of divorce, even to comprehend that their father had done something wrong that required legal consequences. But they were still children who loved and idolized their father despite his flaws. I sat on Emma's bed, surrounded by her collection of science awards and favorite books. And for the first time since discovering Michael's betrayal, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of grief, not for the loss of my marriage, which had been unraveling for years, but for the loss of my children's innocence. They deserved better than this. They deserved a father who put their future ahead of his selfish desires, who honored the trust they placed in him simply by virtue of being their dad. The grief quickly hardened into renewed determination. I would protect them through this transition. I would recover their stolen funds. I would ensure they understood that their father's actions reflected his choices, not their worth. And I would build a new foundation for our family, one based on honesty, security, and genuine care, rather than appearances and deception. With that resolution firmly in mind, I prepared for bed, knowing tomorrow would require all my strength and clarity. The FBI offices occupied several floors of a nondescript government building downtown. Olivia met me in the lobby at 8:30 a.m. as promised, impeccably dressed and carrying a slim briefcase containing all our documentation. "You've met with federal agents before?" she asked as we cleared security. "Twice for healthcare compliance. Investigations at Meridian," I confirmed. "Never as a potential victim, though." "Same basic approach," Olivia advised. "Answer exactly what's asked. Don't volunteer additional information unless it directly relates to the stolen funds, and defer to me if anything seems outside the scope of financial crimes." Agent Carmichael greeted us promptly at 9 a.m., a serious woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately appreciated. She escorted us to a conference room where Harold and James were already waiting, along with another agent introduced as Financial Crimes Specialist Torres. "Thank you all for coming," Agent Carmichael began, opening a folder of notes. "We'd like to start by confirming the basic timeline of events leading to yesterday's arrest of Michael Wexler." For the next hour, we provided detailed statements about the discovery of financial irregularities at Wexler Enterprises, the depletion of the Children's Trust Fund, the company restructuring, and the disappearance of the bearer bonds. Olivia presented our meticulously organized documentation, including the USB drive from Veronica, containing information about the offshore accounts. "This is quite comprehensive," Agent Torres noted, reviewing the materials. "May I ask how you obtained the offshore account information? These appear to be screenshots from Mr. Wexler's personal computer." Olivia answered smoothly. A concerned, party with legal access to Mr. Wexler's computer, noted suspicious financial activities and brought this information to my client's attention. We can provide contact information for this individual who is willing to cooperate fully with your investigation." The agents exchanged glances before Agent Carmichael continued. Mr. Wexler was apprehended with approximately $475,000 in cash, packed in carry-on luggage. He was using a passport in the name of Daniel Mercer with his own photograph. He also had credit cards and additional identification in this false name. The bearer bonds were valued at $500,000, Harold confirmed quietly. He must have converted them to cash. "We've also located a vehicle registered to Summit Acquisitions LLC in the airport parking structure," Agent Torres added. Inside were additional personal items, including several electronic devices currently being analyzed by our technical team. "Has Michael made any statements?" James asked. "He requested an attorney immediately upon detention," Agent Carmichael replied. "He has not answered questions about the funds or his intended destination. However, airline records show he had a connecting flight from Zurich to Singapore." I absorbed this information silently. Singapore, a country with strict banking secrecy laws and no extradition treaty with the United States. Michael had been planning a complete disappearance, not just a temporary escape. "When will formal charges be filed?" Olivia inquired. "The U.S. Attorney is reviewing the case now," Agent Carmichael explained. "At minimum, Mr. Wexler will face charges for false identification documents and currency reporting violations. Based on your statements and documentation, additional charges related to wire fraud, embezzlement, and possibly tax evasion are likely. We'll need detailed depositions from each of you as the case proceeds." The meeting concluded with arrangements for follow-up interviews and assurances that we would be kept informed of significant developments. As we prepared to leave, Agent Carmichael asked me to stay behind briefly. "Mrs. Wexler, a moment in private, please." Once the others had exited, she closed the conference room door. "There's a personal matter I wanted to address separately. During our search of Mr. Wexler's possessions, we found extensive documentation regarding a condominium purchased through Cedar Heights Development, currently occupied by a Veronica Palmer." "Yes," I acknowledged. "Purchased with funds from my children's trust account." "We also found personal correspondence between Mr. Wexler and Ms. Palmer dating back approximately 18 months. She hesitated briefly. "While this may not be relevant to the financial crimes investigation, it might be pertinent to your personal legal matters going forward." I understood what she was delicately attempting to communicate. "You're saying there's evidence of a long-term extramarital relationship?" "Yes," she confirmed, "and potentially relevant financial planning between them that predates the trust fund transfers. My colleague in white-collar crime cases often sees this pattern. Personal relationships intertwined with financial misconduct." "I appreciate the information," I said sincerely. "May I ask if Michael has been permitted to make phone calls since his arrest?" "Limited calls to his attorney only at this point," Agent Carmichael clarified. "Why do you ask?" "I have 2 children who don't yet know their father has been arrested," I explained. "They're returning home this afternoon. I needed to know whether Michael might attempt to contact them before I've had a chance to explain the situation." Her expression softened slightly. "I understand. We can ensure you're notified if he requests any family contacts." "Thank you." Outside the FBI offices, Harold looked physically diminished by the ordeal, his normally commanding presence reduced by the weight of his son's betrayal. James supported him protectively as they waited for their car. "We'll need to issue a statement," Harold said wearily, "before the news breaks publicly." "I've already drafted something," I assured him. "A factual acknowledgement that financial irregularities were discovered. The board took immediate action and were cooperating with authorities. No specific details about Michael, focusing instead on the company's commitment to integrity and proper governance." Harold nodded gratefully. Always 3 steps ahead. Rebecca, James interjected, what about Emma and Ethan? How are you handling this with them? They're coming home this afternoon, I replied. I'll explain the situation in age-appropriate terms. They don't need all the details, just the understanding that their father did something wrong involving money and that he'll be away while the legal process unfolds. If you need anything, support with the kids, help with practical matters, please ask, James offered. They're family. Thank you, I said, genuinely appreciative. Whatever happened with Michael, maintaining the children's relationship with their grandfather and uncle remained important. As their car pulled away, Olivia turned to me. How are you really doing with all this? It's one thing to execute a strategic plan, another to process the emotional impact. I considered her question carefully. I'm focused on protecting what matters, the children, their financial security, the company Harold built, the personal betrayal. I paused, searching for the right words. It's there, but it's not my priority right now. Fair enough, Olivia nodded. But when this immediate crisis stabilizes, you might need to address it. Betrayal at this level leaves scars, Rebecca, even for someone as composed as you. I'll keep that in mind, I promised. For now, I need to prepare for the twins coming home. They deserve the most thoughtful explanation I can provide. I spent the remainder of the morning preparing the house and myself for the difficult conversation ahead. I removed Michael's remaining personal items from common areas, placing them in boxes in the guest room. I gathered financial documents and legal papers, securing them in my home office. I prepared the twins' favorite snacks and arranged comfortable seating in the family room where we could talk without distractions. At precisely 2 p.m., Jennifer's car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I watched Emma and Ethan bound, up the front walk, backpacks bouncing, eager to return to their familiar routines. Their innocence, their simple joy at coming home, made my chest tighten with renewed determination to protect them through what was to come. Mom! Ethan crashed through the door first, all gangly limbs and uncontained energy. Aunt Jen let us get ice cream for lunch. Don't be mad. Emma followed more sedately, observant as always. The house feels different, she said, glancing around. Where's Dad's stuff? I hugged them both, savoring the moment of simple connection before the complexity to come. Let's sit down in the family room. There's something important we need to talk about. Jennifer caught my eye over the children's heads, silently asking if I wanted her to stay. I nodded slightly. Her presence would provide additional support, if needed. As we settled on the sectional sofa, Emma immediately sensed the seriousness of the situation. Is this about you and Dad? Are you getting divorced? Direct and perceptive, just like always. Yes, I confirmed gently. But there's more to the situation that you need to understand. Over the next half hour, I explained in carefully chosen terms that their father had taken money that didn't belong to him, including money from their education fund, that he had been arrested trying to leave the country, that he would be facing legal consequences for his actions. Ethan's face crumpled in confusion. But Dad wouldn't steal. He's rich. He buys us whatever we want. The situation is complicated, I acknowledged. Sometimes adults make very poor choices, even when they should know better. Your father made several bad decisions involving money, and now there are consequences for those decisions. Is he in jail? Emma asked quietly. He's being held by the authorities while they investigate, I explained. I don't know exactly how long that will last or what will happen next, but what I do know is that you both are my priority. We're going to get through this together. Can we see him? Ethan asked, tears forming in his eyes. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. That will depend on what the authorities decide and what your father's lawyer arranges. but I promise to keep you informed about anything that directly affects you. Emma, always quick to process information, asked the question I'd been dreading. Did Dad steal our college money because of that woman? The one who called here looking for him last month when he was supposed to be on a business trip? I exchanged glances with Jennifer, who looked as surprised as I felt. This was the first I'd heard about such a call. What woman, sweetheart? I asked carefully. She said her name was Veronica, Emma replied. She asked if Dad was home, and when I said he was traveling, she seemed confused, said she thought he was back already. I told Dad about it when he called that night, and he got really weird. Said it was probably just his assistant confused about his schedule. The pieces aligned with painful clarity. Emma had inadvertently discovered evidence of Michael's affair a month ago, but neither of us had recognized the significance at the time. The situation with your father involves several poor choices, I said carefully. Some related to money, some related to personal relationships. What's most important for you to understand is that none of this is your fault, and none of his choices reflect on you. But our college money is gone? Ethan asked, his young face trying to process this betrayal. For now, I acknowledged. But I'm working to recover those funds, and regardless, I promise that your education will be secured. You don't need to worry about that. The conversation continued, with both children cycling through questions, confusion, and moments of tearful processing. Jennifer provided gentle support, occasionally offering reassurances or clarifications when the children seemed overwhelmed. By early evening, we had established a tentative new normal. The twins understood the basic situation, knew their immediate routines would continue with minimal disruption, and had been reassured repeatedly of my unconditional support and love. They retreated to their rooms to decompress, Jennifer promising to stay overnight in case additional support was needed. As we cleaned up the dinner dishes, my sister finally asked the question she'd been holding back all afternoon. How are you really handling this, Becca? It's one thing to be strong for the kids, but this is a massive betrayal on every level. I placed the last plate in the dishwasher before answering. I'm compartmentalizing. The practical matters, legal issues, financial recovery, children's welfare, those I can address systematically. The personal betrayal. I hesitated. That will have to wait until the immediate crisis is managed. Jennifer touched my arm gently. Just don't wait too long. Even the strongest containers can crack under enough pressure. I won't, I promised, though in truth processing my own emotions seemed like a luxury I couldn't yet afford. There were too many moving pieces requiring my attention. The company's stabilization, the legal proceedings against Michael, the children's emotional support, the recovery of stolen funds. Later that night, after checking that both children were asleep, I sat in my home office reviewing the day's developments. Michael remained in federal custody, with arraignment scheduled for tomorrow morning. The company statement had been released and picked up by local business press, generating concerned but not panicked responses from key stakeholders. Harold and James were managing inquiries from suppliers and customers with the messaging we had agreed upon. On my personal email, an unexpected message appeared from Diane Powell, the divorce attorney Olivia had connected me with. Federal charges significantly impact divorce strategy. Need to discuss ASAP. I sent a quick reply suggesting a meeting tomorrow afternoon, then turned my attention to the financial documentation Olivia had compiled for the FBI. The paper trail of Michael's betrayal was comprehensive, not just the trust fund depletion and company embezzlement, but countless smaller deceptions stretching back years. Credit card charges for jewelry I'd never received. Weekend business trips to resorts where Veronica's social media showed her lounging by the same pools. Even expense reports at Wexler Enterprises for client dinners that coincided with intimate meals documented in texts recovered from Michael's devices. The scope of the deception was breathtaking, not just in its financial impact, but in the sheer effort it represented. Michael had maintained elaborate lies across multiple domains for years, constructing an alternate reality that existed alongside our family life. How had I missed so many signs? Or had I simply chosen not to see them, preserving the appearance of stability for the children's sake? These questions circled in my mind as I finally prepared for bed, exhausted but knowing sleep would likely prove elusive. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Michael's arraignment, meeting with the divorce attorney, continuing to support the twins as they processed their new reality. But for now, in the quiet darkness of the bedroom I had shared with a man I clearly never truly knew, I allowed myself a moment of raw acknowledgement. Every aspect of the life I had built with Michael had been undermined by his betrayal. The foundation was compromised beyond repair. The only path forward was to dismantle what remained and build something new, something honest, stable, and truly secure for myself and my children. Michael's arraignment was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the federal courthouse downtown. After careful consideration, I decided not to attend in person. My presence would only create a media spectacle and potentially distract from the serious legal proceedings. More importantly, I needed to be available for Emma and Ethan, who had reluctantly returned to school after I assured them maintaining normal routines was important. Instead, I arranged for Olivia to attend as my representative, providing me with a detailed account afterward. This allowed me to focus on the day's other priorities: a full review of Wexler Enterprises' financial position now that Michael's mismanagement had been exposed, and the afternoon meeting with Diane Powell regarding divorce strategy. At Wexler's headquarters, I spent the morning with the accounting team, methodically analyzing every account, contract, and financial obligation. The picture that emerged was concerning but not catastrophic. Michael's systematic embezzlement had created cash flow problems and inventory discrepancies, but the core business remained sound. With proper management and transparent accounting, Wexler Enterprises could recover within 12 to 18 months. James joined me mid-morning, bringing coffee and a supportive presence as we worked through the financial documentation. The operations team found more inventory discrepancies, he reported, sliding a folder across the desk. Michael was reporting phantom stock, furniture that existed only on paper. I reviewed the findings, mentally calculating the impact on quarterly statements. He was inflating inventory values to mask the cash he was diverting. Classic fraud technique. "How bad is it, really?" James asked, his expression serious. "I need to know what we're facing." I appreciated his directness. Unlike Michael, who had always avoided uncomfortable financial realities, James wanted unvarnished truth. Overall company value is down about 22% from what was reported in the last quarterly statement. Cash position is critical, barely enough to cover 45 days of operations. But the underlying business model is still viable. Customer relationships remain strong, and with proper financial controls, we can stabilize within 2 quarters. James absorbed this assessment, nodding slowly. "Dad wants to know if we should consider selling." Selling the business? I hadn't anticipated this possibility. That's Harold's decision ultimately, but I wouldn't recommend it. Selling now, with the company's financial issues freshly exposed and Michael's legal troubles making headlines, would mean accepting pennies on the dollar. Much better to stabilize, demonstrate 2 quarters of transparent financial performance, then reconsider, if that's still his preference. "That's my assessment too," James agreed. But Dad's shaken, not just by Michael's betrayal, but by his own failure to provide proper oversight. He's questioning his judgment. I set aside the financial reports and considered Harold's position carefully. At 78, this scandal represented not just a business crisis, but a profound personal failure. His own son had betrayed the family legacy he had spent decades building. Perhaps I should speak with him directly, not just about the business, but about moving forward. "He'd appreciate that," James said. "He respects you more than ever now." My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Arraignment complete. Bail. Denied due to flight risk. Multiple federal charges filed including wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and currency reporting violations. Trial date set for 3 months out. Michael remanded to Federal Detention Center. Will call with details in 30 min. I showed the message to James, who read it with a grim expression. No bail means he'll be in custody until the trial. Which is appropriate given his attempt to flee the country, I pointed out. This also simplifies certain aspects of our situation. No need to worry about him attempting to access additional funds or interfering with the company's recovery efforts. Or approaching the kids, James added, knowing this had been a particular concern. Exactly. When Olivia called 30 minutes later, she provided additional details from the arraignment. Michael had appeared disheveled and subdued, a stark contrast to his usually polished presentation. His attorney had argued vigorously for bail, offering to surrender Michael's passport and accept electronic monitoring, but the judge had been unmoved given the circumstances of his arrest. The prosecutor laid out a compelling case for flight risk, Olivia explained. False identification already in his possession, one-way ticket to a non-extradition country, liquidated assets. The judge didn't hesitate to deny bail. And the charges? Comprehensive. 6 federal counts including wire fraud, mail fraud, embezzlement, identity fraud, currency reporting violations, and conspiracy. Potential sentences totaling up to 30 years, though likely to be much less with plea arrangements. His attorney has already approached the prosecutor about deal possibilities. What's his leverage for a deal? I asked, curious about Michael's legal strategy. Information, Olivia replied. The prosecutor hinted that there might be broader financial crimes involving others at Preston and Blackwell Investment Group, where some of the offshore accounts were established. If Michael provides valuable testimony against bigger fish, he could potentially reduce his sentence significantly. This was an interesting development. Preston and Blackwell had managed some of Wexler Enterprises' investment accounts, as well as our personal portfolio. If Michael had been involved in broader financial improprieties with investment professionals, it explained his access to the sophisticated offshore banking structures he had utilized. What does this mean for recovering the diverted funds? I asked. Actually, positive news there, Olivia said. Asset forfeiture proceedings have already begun for all identified accounts. The funds from the offshore accounts may take longer to recover due to international banking laws, but the prosecutor believes most can eventually be repatriated. The cash seized during Michael's arrest will be held as evidence until trial, then likely returned as restitution. After ending the call with Olivia, I prepared for my meeting with Diane Powell, gathering financial documentation and notes about Michael's current legal situation. As I was leaving my office, Harold appeared in the doorway, looking tired but determined. Rebecca, do you have a moment? Of course. I gestured to the visitor chairs. I was hoping to speak with you today. Harold settled into the chair, with a sigh. James mentioned you've completed a preliminary financial assessment. Yes, and while the situation is serious, it's not irreparable, I assured him. The core business remains strong. With proper management and transparent accounting, we can restore Wexler Enterprises to solid financial footing. Harold nodded, slowly. That's reassuring to hear. But I'm not just concerned about the business. I'm concerned about you and the children. This public scandal, Michael's eventual criminal trial, it will be difficult for all of you. We'll manage, I said with more confidence than I felt. The children are resilient, and I'm focused on providing stability through this transition. You've shown remarkable strength through all this, Harold observed. Many people would have crumbled under such betrayal. I considered his words carefully. When I discovered what Michael had done, stealing from our children's future, I had a choice. I could collapse under the weight of that betrayal, or I could channel my energy into protecting what matters most. I chose the latter. As did I, when I learned what my son had done to my company, Harold acknowledged. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. I'd like to make some changes to my estate planning, and I wanted to discuss them with you directly. This was unexpected. Harold, that's not necessary. He held up a hand to stop me. Please, hear me out. Michael's actions have demonstrated that he cannot be trusted with the family legacy. James has always been the more responsible son, though I was perhaps blinded by Michael's charisma and apparent success. And you, Rebecca, you've proven your commitment to this family and this company beyond any doubt. Harold reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded document. This is a preliminary revision to my will and the company's succession plan. I'd like you to review it and provide your thoughts. I accepted the document, scanning the main provisions with growing surprise. Harold was restructuring his 40% ownership in Wexler Enterprises, allocating 15% to James, 15% to a trust for Emma and Ethan, and 10% to me personally. Combined with the shares we already controlled, this would give our aligned interests an unassailable 75% majority. Harold, this is extremely generous, but it's not generosity, he interrupted firmly. It's sound business planning. You and James have demonstrated the capacity to lead this company responsibly. My grandchildren deserve to benefit from their heritage, despite their father's poor choices. And you, Rebecca, have earned a permanent place in this family enterprise through your loyalty and expertise. The sincerity in his eyes made it clear this wasn't a spontaneous reaction, but a considered decision. I'm honored by your trust, I said finally, both personally and on behalf of Emma and Ethan. There's one more thing, Harold added. I'd like you to accept the position of CEO permanently, not interim, not temporary during crisis management. The board will support this appointment unanimously. This offer represented a significant professional opportunity, taking the helm of an established family business with a solid market position and strong brand recognition. It would mean leaving Meridian Healthcare after 15 years, but the challenge of restoring Wexler Enterprises offered unique rewards, both professional and personal. I would be honored to accept, I said, making the decision that had been forming since I first uncovered Michael's betrayal. With one condition, that we implement modern governance practices, including an independent audit committee and transparent reporting standards. Harold smiled for the first time in days. Already included in the board resolution, James suggested them specifically, citing your expertise in corporate governance. As we shook hands, formalizing this new chapter for Wexler Enterprises, I felt a moment of poetic justice. Michael had systematically betrayed his family, his company, and his responsibilities, and in doing so, had inadvertently created the opportunity for the company to evolve into a stronger, more principled organization under new leadership. My afternoon meeting with Diane Powell took place at her elegant offices overlooking the city park. Unlike many divorce attorneys who created deliberately intimidating environments, Diane preferred a serene, sophisticated setting that put clients at ease while still conveying professional authority. The federal charges change our approach significantly, she explained after reviewing the morning's arraignment results. With Michael in custody and facing substantial prison time, we have considerable leverage in divorce negotiations. Leverage for what specifically? I asked. While I had no intention of being vindictive, I was determined to protect my children's interests and secure appropriate compensation for Michael's betrayal. Several things, Diane replied, organizing her notes methodically. First, recovering all misappropriated funds, including the children's trust account. Second, securing primary custody with limited supervised visitation for Michael upon his eventual release. Third, establishing clear financial separation with appropriate ongoing support for the children. She paused, studying me carefully. Some clients in your position would pursue punitive financial claims beyond these basics. Given your strong financial position and Michael's criminal situation, we could potentially secure a highly favorable settlement. However, I sense that's not your priority." "It isn't," I confirmed. "I don't need or want Michael's money, much of which appears to have been obtained fraudulently anyway. What I want is clean separation, full recovery of the children's funds, and protection of their emotional well-being through this process." Diane nodded approvingly. A refreshingly reasonable approach. Many high-asset divorces devolve into destructive battles that ultimately harm everyone involved, especially children. We spent the next hour outlining a strategic approach to the IUR divorce proceedings that would run parallel to Michael's criminal case. Given the overwhelming evidence of his financial misconduct and his current incarceration, Diane anticipated minimal resistance to our proposed terms. Michael's criminal attorney would likely advise him to resolve the divorce quickly and cleanly to avoid additional complications. "One thing to consider," Diane noted as our meeting concluded. "The condo purchased for Veronica Palmer with the trust fund money. You mentioned having an agreement allowing her to remain for 90 days? "Yes, in exchange for information about Michael's offshore accounts," I confirmed. "Information that proved crucial in preventing his escape. That agreement might complicate asset recovery slightly, but it's manageable," Diane assured me. "We'll need to document it properly and include provisions for transferring the property back to the trust after her departure." "Already handled," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. Olivia prepared a formal agreement, which Veronica signed the day of our meeting. It includes acknowledgement that the property was purchased with misappropriated funds, details of her cooperation with authorities, and specific terms for her temporary occupancy. Diane reviewed the document with raised eyebrows. "Impressively thorough. You've anticipated virtually every contingency." "It's been necessary," I said simply. By late afternoon, I had returned to Wexler Enterprises to finalize the press release, announcing my appointment as CEO. The statement emphasized continuity and responsible governance, positioning the leadership change as part of the company's commitment to transparency and financial integrity. We scheduled its release for the following morning, giving key stakeholders time to be notified personally before the public announcement. As I was reviewing the final draft, my phone rang, the twins' school calling. My heart rate immediately accelerated. "Mrs. Wexler, this is Principal Sanderson. There's been an incident involving Emma that requires your immediate attention." "Is she all right?" I asked, already gathering my things to leave. "Physically, yes," he assured me. "But there was an altercation with another student who made some unfortunate comments about the situation with Mr. Wexler." Emma responded, rather forcefully. I closed my eyes briefly, understanding immediately. News of Michael's arrest had evidently reached the school community, and children, with their unfiltered cruelty, had wasted no time in targeting Emma. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, I promised. When I arrived at Oakland Preparatory School, I found Emma sitting stiffly in a chair outside the principal's office, her normally neat appearance disheveled, eyes red from crying but chin raised defiantly. At 12, she was at that difficult transition between childhood and adolescence, still vulnerable, but developing a fierce sense of justice and personal dignity. "Mom," she acknowledged as I approached, her voice deliberately controlled. "They called you." "They did," I confirmed, sitting beside her rather than looming over her. "Want to tell me what happened?" Emma's composure cracked slightly. "Tyler Morris said Dad was going to prison because he's a thief and a liar. He said our house would be taken away and we'd have to live on the street. He said it in front of everyone at lunch." Her hands clenched into fists at the memory. So I told him to shut up. When he didn't, I pushed his lunch tray into his lap. Despite the seriousness of the situation, I had to suppress a smile at her directness. Emma had always been one to address problems head-on, a quality I generally admired, though perhaps not when expressed through cafeteria confrontations. "I see. I said carefully. And what does the school policy say about physical conflicts? That they're never acceptable, she recited dutifully. That we should seek adult intervention. But Mom, the teacher wasn't there, and everyone was listening, and I just couldn't. Her voice broke, the emotions finally overwhelming her controlled facade. I pulled her into a hug, feeling her slim shoulders shake with suppressed sobs. It's okay to be upset, I murmured. What Tyler said was cruel and mostly untrue, but how we respond to cruelty matters too. After a moment, Emma pulled back, wiping her eyes. Am I in big trouble? With the school? Probably some detention. With me? No, I said honestly. I wish you'd found a different way to handle it, but I understand why you reacted as you did. We're going to need to develop some strategies for dealing with situations like this, because unfortunately, people may say unkind things about our family situation for a while. Principal Sanderson emerged from his office then, ushering us both inside for a discussion about the incident. As expected, Emma received 3 days of lunchtime detention, a relatively light consequence given the school's typical response to physical altercations, suggesting the administration understood the extenuating circumstances. We're also addressing the other students' behavior, Principal Sanderson assured me. Bullying or taunting about family situations violates our community standards. Additionally, we'll be sending communication to all parents reminding them about appropriate discussions with their children regarding sensitive matters in our community. After completing the necessary paperwork, I signed Emma out for the remainder of the day. As we walked to the car, I asked, should we pick up Ethan too? Or would you prefer some time just us? Emma considered this. Ethan should come too. He's probably hearing stuff as well, even if he's not saying anything. Her concern for her brother touched me. Despite being twins, Emma and Ethan had distinctly different personalities. She confronted problems directly, while he tended to internalize his concerns, processing them quietly before sharing. When we collected Ethan from his classroom, his expression confirmed Emma's intuition. Though he hadn't been involved in any incidents, his subdued demeanor suggested he'd been affected by schoolyard discussions of our family situation. Instead of going straight home, I drove to Riverside Park, a peaceful spot along the river where we'd often come for family outings when the twins were younger. We found a quiet bench overlooking the water, and I bought ice cream from a nearby vendor, establishing a safe, casual atmosphere for what needed to be a difficult conversation. I know today was challenging, I began once we were settled. When someone we love does something wrong, it affects how people see us, even though we haven't done anything wrong ourselves. Why did Dad steal the money? Ethan asked quietly, the question he'd been avoiding since our initial conversation about Michael's arrest. Didn't he know he'd get caught? People who do wrong things often convince themselves they won't get caught, I explained. Or they believe the rules don't apply to them for some reason. Your father made a series of poor choices, each one making the next one easier, until he found himself in serious trouble. Is he going to prison for a long time? Emma asked, more directly than her brother. Probably for some time, yes, I answered honestly. The exact length will depend on several factors, including whether he cooperates with the authorities investigating the financial crimes. Will we visit him? Ethan's voice was small, conflicted. This was a question I'd been preparing for, knowing the answer needed to balance their emotional needs with practical realities. That will be your choice, not mine, I said carefully. If you want to visit, I'll arrange it when it becomes possible. If you're not ready, that's completely okay too. There's no right or wrong answer, and you might feel differently at different times. I don't think I want to, Emma said firmly. Not now anyway. Ethan looked torn but didn't contradict his sister. That's completely understandable, I assured them. And you don't have to decide now or feel pressured either way. What's most important is that we keep talking honestly about how everyone is feeling. What about school? Emma asked. People are saying stuff. That's going to happen, I acknowledged. When news is exciting or dramatic, people talk about it, adults and kids alike. We can't control what others say, but we can decide how we respond. Pushing lunch trays might not be the best approach, I added with a small smile at Emma, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. So what do? Ethan asked. We hold our heads high, knowing that we've done nothing wrong. We continue living our lives with integrity. We correct actual misinformation calmly if it seems important, and we ignore cruel comments that are just meant to hurt. I looked at each of them in turn. And most importantly, we support each other as a family. The three of us are a team now more than ever. What about Grandpa Harold and Uncle James? Ethan asked. Are they still our family too? Absolutely, I confirmed immediately. They love you both very much and are still very much your family. In fact, Grandpa Harold has been making special arrangements to ensure you both remain connected to the family business in the future. This seemed to reassure Ethan, whose primary concern had always been security and belonging. Emma, more pragmatic, had another question. What about the house? Tyler said we'd lose it. Tyler was wrong about that, I said firmly. Our home is secure. My job is secure. In fact, I've accepted a new position as CEO of Wexler Enterprises, which means I'll be working with Grandpa Harold and Uncle James to strengthen the company your grandfather built. You're going to be in charge of the whole company? Emma asked, impressed despite her emotional day. Yes, I confirmed. It's a big responsibility, but I believe I can help rebuild what was damaged. We spent another hour in the park, the conversation gradually shifting from Michael's situation to more normal topics. Ethan's upcoming basketball tournament, Emma's science project, plans for the weekend. By the time we headed home, both children seemed more settled, having had space to express their concerns and receive honest, age-appropriate answers. That evening, after the twins had gone to bed, I sat in my home office updating my journal with the day's developments. The appointment as CEO, the divorce strategy meeting with Diane, Emma's school incident, each significant in its own way, pieces of the new reality we were constructing from the wreckage of Michael's betrayal. My phone rang, Olivia calling, with an unexpected update. Michael wants to meet with you, she said without preamble. His attorney contacted me an hour ago requesting a private conversation between the two of you at the detention center. This was surprising. Michael had made no attempt to contact me since his arrest, focusing instead on his legal defense. Did they indicate the purpose? Nothing specific, just that it concerns matters beyond the legal proceedings that Michael feels he needs to discuss with you personally. Olivia's tone conveyed her skepticism. I advised against it, of course. Anything he needs to communicate can go through proper legal channels. I considered the request carefully. While meeting with Michael offered certain risks, emotional, manipulation, attempts to secure sympathy that might influence divorce proceedings, it also presented potential benefits. Understanding his perspective, his motivations, might provide closure or at least context for his extraordinary betrayal. I think I'll meet with him, I decided. Not because he deserves it, but because it might help me process everything that's happened. And because at some point the children may ask questions only he can answer, I should be prepared for that. If you're certain, Olivia said, still sounding doubtful. I'll arrange for it to be properly monitored and documented. No private conversations that could later be misrepresented. Agreed. And I want you present as my counsel. Of course, I'll coordinate with his attorney and let you know when it's scheduled. After ending the call, I found myself staring at the family photo still on my desk. Michael, the twins, and me, smiling on a beach vacation 2 years ago. The image captured nothing of the deception already underway even then, the offshore accounts being established, the relationship with Veronica likely already developing. How had I missed the signs? Had I been so focused on my career, on maintaining our comfortable life that I'd overlooked the fracturing of our foundation? Or had Michael simply been exceptionally skilled at compartmentalizing his double life? These questions had circled in my mind continuously since discovering his betrayal. Perhaps meeting with him, confronting him directly in a controlled environment, would provide some answers. Not for reconciliation, which was impossible given his actions, but for my own understanding and eventual healing. The following morning brought the official announcement of my appointment as CEO of Wexler Enterprises. The press release went out at 9 a.m., followed by a small, carefully managed media event where Harold formally introduced me in my new role. The business press responded positively, positioning the leadership change as a prudent response to financial irregularities and praising the company's transparency in addressing the situation. Wexler Enterprises demonstrates corporate responsibility by appointing seasoned financial executive to CEO role, read one headline. Family furniture company pursues modern governance structure under new leadership, declared another. The narrative we had crafted was taking hold, a story of responsible corporate governance responding appropriately to discovered irregularities rather than a scandal-plagued family business imploding under fraud and betrayal. This framing would help preserve customer confidence and supplier relationships, critical elements for the company's recovery. After the press conference, I met with the executive team to outline our priorities for the next 90 days. Comprehensive financial, audit, inventory reconciliation, banking relationship stabilization, and transparent communication with key stakeholders. The team, relieved to have clear direction after weeks of mounting uncertainty under Michael's increasingly erratic leadership, responded with enthusiasm and commitment. By mid-afternoon, I had confirmation from Olivia that the meeting with Michael had been arranged for the following day at the Federal Detention Center. With this knowledge sitting heavily in my thoughts, I decided to address another challenging conversation I'd been postponing, updating the twins about their father's legal situation and my planned visit. I waited until evening, when homework was complete and we were sharing a quiet dinner at home. I wanted to let you both know that I'm going to see your father tomorrow, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Both children looked up with surprise. Emma spoke first, her voice carefully controlled. Why? I thought everything was happening through lawyers now. Most things are, I confirmed. But he's requested a meeting to discuss certain matters directly. I've agreed with my attorney present. Is he going to try to convince you not to divorce him? Ethan asked, unexpectedly perceptive. That's not an option, I clarified gently, but firmly. The legal proceedings for divorce are already underway and will continue regardless of tomorrow's conversation. But there may be things he wants to explain or discuss regarding his actions. Are you going to ask him why he took our money? Emma's question cut to the heart of what continued to disturb her most. Not just the betrayal, but the specific targeting of funds meant for her and her brother's future. Yes, I promised. That's one of the questions I intend to ask, among others. Will you tell us what he says? Ethan asked. I considered this carefully. I'll share what seems appropriate and helpful for you to know. Some adult conversations aren't necessarily beneficial for children to hear in detail, but I won't hide important information from you either. This balanced approach seemed to satisfy them both for the moment. We finished dinner discussing more routine matters, school assignments, weekend plans, an upcoming visit from Harold who had suggested taking them to a basketball game. Later, as I prepared notes for the meeting with Michael, I reflected on how drastically our lives had changed in just a few short weeks. The comfortable, seemingly secure existence we had maintained for years had been revealed as largely illusory, built on Michael's deceptions and my own willingness to accept the surface appearance of our marriage. Yet from this painful revelation had emerged new possibilities: my leadership role at Wexler Enterprises, a deeper relationship with Harold and James, and most importantly, a more honest foundation for my relationship with Emma and Ethan. We were navigating difficult waters, together, but with integrity and openness that had perhaps been missing before. Tomorrow's meeting with Michael represented another step in this journey, not toward reconciliation, but toward understanding and closure. Whatever his motivations for requesting the conversation, I would approach it with the same clarity and purpose that had guided me since discovering his betrayal. The truth, however painful, was preferable to comfortable illusions. That conviction had carried me through the crisis thus far, and would continue to light the path forward for myself and my children. The Federal Detention Center looked exactly as one might expect: austere gray buildings surrounded by chain-link fences topped with coils of razor wire. As Olivia and I passed through multiple security checkpoints, I maintained the same composed demeanor that had carried me through board meetings and court appearances. Inside, however, I was bracing myself for the inevitable emotional impact of seeing Michael in these circumstances. We were escorted to a private meeting room reserved for attorney-client conversations. The space was deliberately impersonal. A simple table with 4 chairs, beige walls, fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. A corrections officer would remain stationed outside the door, visible through a small window but unable to hear our conversation. "Remember," Olivia cautioned as we settled into our chairs, "you're under no obligation to respond to emotional appeals or personal accusations. We're here strictly to listen to what he has to say and to clarify any matters relevant to the divorce proceedings or the children's welfare." I nodded, arranging my notepad and pen precisely on the table before me. "I understand. This isn't about reconciliation or even closure. It's about information." When the door opened again, I was momentarily taken aback by Michael's appearance. Just 3 weeks in detention had transformed him. The designer suits and perfect grooming had been replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit and a gauntness that suggested he wasn't eating well. His normally confident posture was diminished, shoulders slightly hunched as his attorney guided him to the chair opposite me. "Rebecca," he acknowledged, his voice hoarse. "Thank you for coming." I maintained a neutral expression. "You requested this meeting, Michael. What did you want to discuss?" He glanced at his attorney, who nodded encouragingly. "Several things. First, I've instructed my legal team to stop contesting the divorce proceedings. I'll accept whatever terms you propose, provided they include reasonable provisions for me to maintain some relationship with Emma and Ethan after I serve my time." This immediate capitulation was unexpected. I had anticipated resistance, negotiation, perhaps even manipulation. Olivia made a note on her legal pad but remained silent, allowing me to lead the conversation. "That's for the courts to determine based on what's best for the children," I replied evenly. "But regarding the divorce itself, your cooperation will make the process less complicated for everyone." Michael nodded, accepting this response. "Second, I've provided full details of all financial accounts to the federal prosecutors. Everything. The offshore holdings, investment accounts, real estate. I'm cooperating completely in hopes of recovering as much as possible for restitution." "Including the Children's Trust Fund?" "Yes." For the first time, he couldn't meet my gaze. "The trust fund will be fully restored from seized assets as a priority. My attorney has already filed the necessary paperwork." I made a note of this commitment, though I knew the actual restoration would depend on legal proceedings beyond Michael's direct control. "You mentioned wanting to discuss matters beyond the legal situation. What else did you want to address?" Michael seemed to deflate further, the practiced charm and confidence that had defined him throughout our marriage entirely absent now. I wanted to attempt to explain, not to justify. There's no justification for what I did, but to help you understand how things unraveled. "I'm listening," I said, maintaining my composed exterior despite the surge of emotions his words provoked. "It started small," he began, staring at his hands on the table. using company funds for personal expenses, manipulating inventory reports to cover cash flow issues. I told myself it was temporary, just until certain investments paid off. But once that line was crossed, each subsequent step became easier. And the Children's Trust Fund? Was that just another easy step? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice on this point. Michael flinched visibly. That was different. By then, I was already in too deep with both the company finances and personal entanglements. The offshore accounts required significant capitalization to function effectively. The trust fund was liquid and accessible. He looked up finally, his expression haunted. I convinced myself I would replace it before they needed it for college, that it was just borrowing, not stealing. And Veronica? The question had to be asked, though I realized I felt more curiosity than pain about his affair at this point. Another symptom of the same sickness, he admitted. The constant need for validation, for proof that I was successful and desirable. When the pressure of maintaining the financial facade became overwhelming, I created an escape fantasy, a new life with someone who didn't know the real me, who only saw the illusion I presented. His self-awareness was surprising, suggesting either genuine reflection during his time in detention or coaching from his attorney on how to appear remorseful. Either way, his explanation offered nothing I hadn't already deduced. Why did you request this meeting, Michael? Really? I asked directly. These explanations don't change anything. He was quiet for a moment, seemingly gathering his thoughts. I guess I needed you to know that I recognize the magnitude of what I've done. To you, to the children, to Dad and James, to the company. That I understand there's no fixing this. He paused, swallowing hard. And I wanted to ask, when the time is right, if you would help the twins understand that while I failed completely as a husband and catastrophically as a financial steward, I did love them. Still do. The raw emotion in his voice suggested this, at least was genuine. Despite everything, Michael did love Emma and Ethan, however poorly his actions had demonstrated that love. I won't lie to them about what you did, I said firmly. But I also won't stand in the way of them having a relationship with you in the future, if that's what they want. They'll make their own decisions about forgiveness when they're ready. Relief washed across his face. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. As the meeting concluded, Michael's attorney outlined the practical next steps, completing asset declarations for the divorce proceedings, finalizing his plea agreement with federal prosecutors, establishing a communication protocol for any necessary future interactions regarding the children. When we stood to leave, Michael asked one final question. How are they, Emma and Ethan? I considered how to answer, balancing honesty with appropriate boundaries. They're resilient, hurt and confused, but adapting. Emma had an incident at school defending you, actually. Despite everything, their loyalty runs deep. Michael closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this information with visible emotion. Please tell them, he began, then stopped himself. No, I have no right to ask you to deliver messages. When they're ready to hear from me directly, if ever, I'll be here. This small recognition of appropriate boundaries suggested that perhaps, in the crucible of consequences, Michael was beginning to develop the self-awareness and responsibility he had lacked throughout our marriage. As Olivia and I departed the detention center, returning to the bright autumn sunshine that contrasted sharply with the institutional grimness inside, I felt an unexpected lightness. The meeting had provided no dramatic revelations, no satisfying confrontation or vindication. Instead, it had offered something more valuable, confirmation that my decision to move forward without Michael was absolutely correct. You handled that remarkably well, Olivia observed as we walked to the parking area. Many people would have used the opportunity to express anger or extract further emotional concessions. There would be no point, I replied. Michael's actions and their consequences speak for themselves. My energy is better directed toward rebuilding the company, the children's security, our future. 6 months later, that rebuilding was well underway. Wexler Enterprises had stabilized financially under my leadership, with transparent reporting practices and modernized inventory systems eliminating the problems that had enabled Michael's fraud. The first quarterly statement, showing clear improvement, had generated positive coverage in the business press, and customer confidence was gradually returning. The divorce had been finalized without contest, with terms that prioritized the children's well-being while acknowledging the realities of Michael's incarceration. The trust fund had been fully restored through asset forfeiture proceedings, with additional funds placed in a separate trust to secure the twins' future educational expenses. Most importantly, Emma and Ethan were adapting to our new normal. After initial resistance, both had agreed to monthly phone calls with their father, supervised by a family therapist who helped navigate the complex emotions these conversations generated. They continued to maintain close relationships with Harold and James, finding stability in these family connections that remained untainted by Michael's actions. On a crisp spring morning, I sat in my office at Wexler Enterprises reviewing the latest financial projections. The window behind my desk offered views of the city skyline, including the building that housed Meridian Healthcare, where I had spent 15 years of my career. That chapter had closed, but the skills and experiences I had gained there were now being applied to restoring a family legacy nearly destroyed by greed and deception. A knock at the door interrupted my review. Harold entered, looking more energetic than he had in months. At 79, he had initially considered full retirement after Michael's arrest, but found renewed purpose in mentoring me through the transition and working with James to strengthen customer relationships. The board just unanimously approved the expansion proposal, he announced with evident satisfaction. The Denver location will open on schedule this fall. This was significant news. The expansion represented the first major growth initiative since I had taken over as CEO, a vote of confidence from the board and a signal to the market that Wexler Enterprises had not just survived its crisis, but was poised for new growth. That's excellent, I replied, setting aside the financial reports. The market analysis suggests we'll reach profitability at the new location within 18 months, possibly sooner. Harold settled into the chair opposite my desk, his expression turning reflective. You know, when I started this company 50 years ago, I never imagined the journey it would take. The growth, the challenges, the near collapse, and now this renewal. He shook his head slowly. And I certainly never anticipated that the person who would ultimately save it would be my daughter-in-law. Former daughter-in-law, I corrected gently. No, Harold said firmly. Regardless of the legal status of your marriage to Michael, you remain family to me, to James, and most importantly to my grandchildren. Some bonds transcend legal definitions. His words touched me deeply. Throughout the upheaval of the past months, Harold's unwavering support had provided an anchor not just for me, but for Emma and Ethan as well. He had demonstrated that family could be defined by mutual respect and shared values, rather than merely by marriage or blood. Thank you, I said simply. That means more than you know. As Harold departed for his weekly lunch with the twins, a tradition he had established to maintain their connection during the transition, I turned back to the financial projections on my desk. The numbers told a story of recovery, of careful stewardship, of principled leadership replacing fraud and deception. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Science fair project won first place. Ms. Richards wants to enter it in the state competition. I smiled, typing a quick response of congratulation and pride. Despite everything they had endured, both children were thriving, Emma excelling academically, Ethan finding confidence through sports and music. Their resilience continued to amaze and inspire me. The journey from betrayal to rebuilding had been neither simple nor painless. Michael's actions had shattered the foundations of our family life, threatening not just our financial security but our emotional well-being and social standing. Yet from those broken pieces, we had constructed something perhaps stronger than what existed before. Relationships based on honesty rather than illusion, security founded on transparency rather than blind trust, and a future defined by our own capabilities rather than someone else's promises. As I looked out over the city where my children would grow up, where they would eventually attend college with the funds I had recovered for them, where they would build their own lives with a clear understanding of both integrity and consequences, I felt no regret for the path that had led here. Only quiet certainty that when faced with betrayal, I had chosen strength over surrender, action over acceptance, and ultimately, reclamation over retreat. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.